Hello, this is an installment of the IACAPAP courses, and we're going to be talking about getting published today, specifically 10 practical tips towards getting published. I am Andrès Martin, and the reason why I'm talking about this has to do with two hats that I wear. One, as part of IACAPAP, I'm a counselor on the executive committee since 2014, and between 2004 and 2014, I was a co-leader of the Donald J. Cohen Mentorship Program, where something we very routinely did and continue doing is teach young scholars in child and adolescent psychiatry tips to how to get published. Finally, I have served as editor of the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry between 2008 and 2017, and certainly have seen a lot of the do's and the don'ts of getting published. I'm hoping that by sharing them here, they will be of use to you. So this is the point where most of us start. Me, publish, impossible, scary, unbelievable. If you are feeling some of that, do not worry. You are definitely not alone. As you can see here in my native city of Mexico City, these are many, many people nervous about writing or something else. You are not alone. This is a very common fear. But you should know, like Snoopy, that good writing is hard work. It is hard work, and there are some specific steps to make it easier, to make it less painful. What I have done now is collect 10 of the most common ideas or tips that come up over and over again. First and foremost, you need a good story to tell. That story typically is a scientific story. That's what we're going to be talking about, but it doesn't necessarily have to be. It can be something more personal. It can be something more descriptive. It can be any piece of writing. But whatever it is, it has to be a good story and one that you are passionate about. There really is no substitute for good science or for a good story. So we will start from the point that you have done that piece of the work, and now we're going to be translating it into paper, into something that is submitted and eventually published. The kind of things that we as editors look for in new submissions are, among other things, these 4 facts. Is this submission new? Is it something really innovative? Is it true? And I put true with question marks, making the point that we don't really own the science, but we just approximate it. And has it been true enough? Are the methods valid? Does the paper have the methodology to really answer the question it poses? And always, always have the authors followed ethical guidelines. This ethical point is important enough that I included in the very first tip, and I will return to it as part of the 10th tip. Number 2, never worry alone. Writing is really a team sport, so collaborate, become part of a group. Know that it's very few papers, particularly scientific papers, that you will write alone. Most of them are going to be part of a group. Ask for help. And ask for help not only in areas where you feel weak. Many of us feel weak in statistics, so we may feel more comfortable asking for help there. But ask for help at all levels. Some of these will be described as we go along. Remember that you will only learn by working with more experienced authors. It's like tennis. Your game will only get better if you play with better players. Writing, of course, is a good place, an optimal place, I would say, for the mentorship rubber to meet the road. Is your mentor being responsive? Is he being detailed? Is he or she taking you seriously? All of that will become very clear as you write. Number 3, think like an editor. We're not that mysterious. We are people, and we think in specific ways. So you should know this, that as an editor, most rejections, especially early rejections, are based on the abstract and the method section. It is rather unusual for an editor to read your paper in full until much later in the game. But you should know that every single word in your abstract is going to be looked at with a hawk's eye. And if the editor has some initial reservations or questions, the next step is going to be to look at the methods. So you need to be particularly airtight there. This may seem obvious, but it's not unusual that authors spend a great deal of time in their introduction and in their discussion, as well they should do, but tend to forget the abstract, leave it as an afterthought. So your introduction and your conclusions will rarely be read in depth early on. Do not leave your abstract as an afterthought. Start with your abstract. Continue polishing your abstract as you go along, and end with your abstract. The abstract is your entry door. Avoid others pointing out your limitations. Be very aware what imperfections your paper has. There are no perfect papers, and yours is no exception. So point them out in the limitations. Be aware, whatever it is, your sample size, your method, whatever it is, point it out. Avoid others doing it for you. Now, writing a paper often may feel like this, that you have to do this tremendous jumping of hurdles, and that you have all of these antagonistic editors and reviewers standing in your way. But I encourage you to look at this as a process that will enhance and enrich your paper, so make the best use of it. 4. Present your work in an engaging way. Don't be boring. Don't be dull. Even though you're talking about science, there is a way of making it engaging. Start by making a case for your submission. Why did you pick this journal? Let the editor know. Cover letters are generally underappreciated and not really taken seriously. They're taken as pro forma. But this is an opportunity to very briefly say, "Dear editor, I selected your journal, and your journal in particular, because of this and the other." Make a case for it. If you're not sure, consider approaching the editor before submitting. Write an email. Don't forget the little things. Don't irritate the editor or dismiss obvious points. Read the instructions for authors. Follow them. An editor will know right away when you're not taking the submission seriously, when you're maybe just repackaging something that failed somewhere else. And part of being engaging in how you present your work is to be bold, to take chances, to make a case for why you are doing something. Be gutsy, be bold, have fun with it. Number 5, and especially relevant for IACAPAP members, don't despair if English is not your native language. It is not my native language. I am originally from Mexico, as I pointed out, and all of us can achieve a use of language that will help us in publication. This should not be what stands in your way. What you need to know is whether a reader outside of your field understands what you're trying to convey. So, float your paper by someone who's not an expert. You're not asking them for content advice, but you're asking them to see whether your ideas are understandable to them. Next, see if there's someone in your group who is a native English speaker or someone who speaks really good English who you can approach. There certainly are professional services that you can use to polish a paper, to get it into good English form, if you will, but I would advise against using them early on. You can use them maybe late in the process when a paper is close to being accepted, because they can be costly, and I don't think that this is the first place that you should go, but you should be aware that they do exist. You can Google them and find them very easily. Learn from rejections, especially quick rejections. Know that the rejection part is part and parcel of publication. You will never publish if you don't get rejections. In fact, the only reason why you may not have any rejections is that you haven't submitted enough. So take pride in your rejections, collect them, and do something about them. So the first thing to do is to revise as appropriate. It is all too easy in this day and age, with thousands of journals all available online, to just get a rejection and without changing, sending it to the next journal. Avoid doing that. And remember that it is a small field of experts. So if you think that by submitting it to another journal you will get a completely new set of reviewers, you're probably right, but you may not be, and the same person may be seeing the same identical paper and get irritated that their feedback was not taken seriously. Most rejections are not necessarily because of content, but because of a fit, probably you didn't really gauge well where this paper belonged. And this is an area where your mentor, your senior partner, your librarian can be very helpful. Where does this particular story, this particular article belong? If you are lucky enough to get an invitation to revise, know that there's an art to responding to reviewers' comments. So don't blow it. You're halfway there. To make the point about rejections, let me go back to my friend Snoopy, who got a letter saying, "Dear Snoopy, dear contributor, thank you so much for submitting your story to our magazine. To save time, we are enclosing 2 rejection slips, one for this story and one for the next story that you send us." So Snoopy was a very prolific author, and he got many papers and many cartoons published, but he got many, many more that were rejected. And so should you. Never take rejection personally. Never do. Get angry for a day or two, but then go back and see what the rejection is saying. There's a lot to be learned there. There's a couple of exceptions where you can become appropriately angry. One of them is if there are ad hominem comments, comments that are directed to you as a person rather than to your science. Poor editor etiquette is really not tolerable, and especially inexcusable is having limited English as an excuse for such behavior. So if you get a letter demeaning you as a person or saying things that are really personal, you should stand up for that, and you can write and say, I understand that I've been rejected, but I actually think that the tone here is wrong. Another perhaps less dramatic exception is that on rare occasions a rebuttal is warranted. For example, you may have a sense that the reviewers really didn't get your paper, that they misinterpreted or misunderstood a key piece of the paper, and you can ask. On occasion, a rebuttal can be opened. And there's nothing wrong in asking if you think that you have a case. Be always civil, proactive. Stick to the facts. Don't be accusatory. Use the word respect repeatedly. I respectfully disagree. I respectfully ask that you reconsider, etc. The 8th point, balance your ambition with realism. We all want to see our papers published in the highest possible journals, but that's not what we always should be doing. So prioritize the visibility, how broadly your paper will be seen, but how timely it is going to be. Maybe you need to publish it sooner rather than higher. What's the impact that you're looking for? A few papers are going to change the course of science, but many papers that we all write may really influence those close to us. So know the sphere of influence that you're going after. Another way of thinking about it is to think globally. Certainly in IACAPAP we believe in that, but act locally. Don't dismiss regional publications. Don't only go for the big international names and journals. Know the journals in your area of the world. Go there. Impact factor is not all. In fact, it should be not what you're thinking about. Think of who you want to reach. Don't think of the perceived fame of the publication that you're pursuing. How long can your findings wait until publication? And equally, how long can your curriculum wait? It may be that early on in your career, you need to get those papers out, and it may be better to get it into a place that's a little bit more modest, but more prompt. As a general rule of thumb, once you have a sense of what journal you're targeting, maybe go for something a little bit higher, knowing that you might luck out and it might belong there. But if it doesn't make it in that slightly higher journal, you're probably going to get some valuable feedback that will make your paper even tighter and stronger in the publication that you originally anticipated going into. 9. There are other doors into a journal. It's not all just science. And know that writing begets writing. So keep on writing, whatever it is. In addition to writing, volunteer as a reviewer. Contact the journals that you're interested in. Introduce yourself and your areas of interest. An editor will get to know you, and you will become a better critic of your and others' work. Consider, especially if you're a first-time author or a very junior author, letters to the editor, book reviews, miscellaneous small pieces that will teach you something about writing. Consider joining one of your senior partners and writing a chapter, but be careful not to write too many chapters. One chapter early in your career is good. 2 or 3 or 4 are going to get you bogged down. And again, not all stories are science. Even reflective pieces, opinion pieces, all of this is part of writing. The last point, going full circle to the first, is to always adhere to ethical principles. And we could spend a lot of time on this, but let me just share some of the highlights. Conflict of interest. Is there a financial conflict that you need to declare or be aware? Or other conflict? Maybe you don't want your paper reviewed by this or that person, or you shouldn't review this or the other person's. So be aware of potential conflicts that you might have. Don't overpublish. Don't go into what's called redundant publication, which is something particularly of concern to big studies out of which many articles can spin off. That's understandable, but be aware of what's called the salami effect, of cutting thinner and thinner slices of something till they become meaningless. This is also called the LPU phenomenon, or the least publishable unit. Publish few and stronger is better than many and dilute. Plagiarism, copying the words of others, or even lifting passages from something you've published yourself in the past, that can be dangerous, especially in these days when all of us editors have software that routinely scan all of the papers that you submit, trying to identify plagiarism. Don't trick the system. You can't. Authorship is a big deal. Who is the author? Who's the first, the second, and the last? Try to identify this early on, and if there are any conflicts, resolve it among yourself, the authors. Only then go to editors or to superiors, but resolve it early. And this may change. You may have decided on day 1 that the order is ABC, but after the work is done, probably it should be CAB. Sensitive use of language is very important, and something that we may not always be naturally acquainted with. One area that I hope to impress on you is that of the person-first language. Always use language that uses first the person and then the condition. For example, we never talk about autistic children or schizophrenic person. We talk about a child with autism, about a person with schizophrenia. Person first, child first, autism second. And of course, fraudulent research is a big no-no, and we all know that the field of science has been littered with such mishaps. There certainly is a whole continuum of ethical concerns, from very slight to very boorish and terrible. Avoid being there. If you have any questions, or if we as editors have questions, we often resort to what's called the COPE guidelines, Committee on Publication Ethics. You can easily find it with your search engine, and you can find there the kind of algorithms that we use to deal with some of the ethical problems that I just mentioned. In general, 2 people get into ethical problems. Offender group 1 is a highly ambitious, mad scientist-like person who wants to publish. Balance that ambition. Offender group 2 is a more isolated clinician, someone who wants to be part of the game but doesn't quite know how to get in and may end up becoming one of many sites in a large pharmaceutical trial, for example, and taking some shortcuts. These are, not the only 2 types of characters that can get into ethical quandaries, but they're common enough that I point them out. In closing, as a postscript, just do it. You can write. It's not all that different. Remember that writing is really just thinking clearly and deliberately. So go for it. Life is filled with all sorts of reasons to procrastinate and not to do it. But just go for it. Do it. Seek to be polished and not perfect. because the perfect is the enemy of the good. I wish you all the best, and I hope that these tips are going to be helpful to you and your colleagues. Additional resources are available on this website. Thank you for your time.